Welcome back everyone to my second video on what was actually my very first EDH deck. Um, just part of it was the first deck. Roon was not around when I first got into creating EDH, but this deck was Rafik of the Many. Many of the creatures were in my Rafik deck, especially the mana creatures. The enter the battlefield creatures, a lot of them didn't even exist back then. They've just gotten so much better, and this deck has gotten tons of ammunition over the past couple of years. I've really enjoyed the blue white green or green white blue color combination is my favorite. Bar none, my favorite card in the game is the Rox War Monk. This is his bigger brother. Unfortunately, Roxy couldn't make it into this deck because he has no Enter the Battlefield trigger, and he doesn't produce mana. But I've had an affinity for these colors since I started playing this game. My very first top 8 was with a Bant Rafik deck back in the Alara Reborn and M10 era. The the World Weight coming out and putting Jace the Mind Sculptor in it only made it better, and I hammered it as much as I could, and I enjoyed it even when Jun was destroying it. But once all that flopped out of standard and became relegated to the past, I knew I had to keep my Bant alive. And Rafik of the Many was doing great, but he gets such a huge target painted on him that I decided to switch it up to Roon, who I'm actually discovering might be even more broken. This guy, the name of the game is Flicker. You pay 2, tap him, exile another target creature, return it to the battlefield at the beginning of the next end step. That is great. This is not just for your creatures. You can protect yourself with it if someone's coming at you with a really big creature of their own. Now, you can also trigger other people's Enter the Battlefield abilities, so you got to be careful which ones you hit with it, but the options are there. And this deck has a huge flicker package. It has lots of ramp, it has lots of draw. It's just a lot of fun to play. And without any further ado, let's get to the cards. Well, every good deck, especially a tricolor deck, is going to have really good mana. This deck so far has had some of the best mana I've ever had in any deck, and I mean, I've had years to perfect it, so it's gotten pretty darn good. There are still some changes to be made. As I said, this used to be a Rafik deck, so the mana base was built around that. You'll see at least one card that reflects that, but so far I only run the 6 basics. I've found that I don't need a whole lot more, although the option to run a lot more is definitely there. Got a few ways to tutor up lands, and there are times that I actually run out of targets, but then they just become ways to shuffle, so that actually can make a difference. Um, the basics I would run heavier on forest because you want green early, usually, even though I swear there are more blue and white cards in this deck than anything. You want to have the green before you have the blue and white. Beyond the basics, we've got the usual command tower. It taps for all 3 colors. We've got the come into play tapped version of the command tower, the old Seaside Citadel. And I only run 2 of the Vivid lands because they're the only 2 that I had. They came with the Slivers deck. I run Vivid Creek and Vivid Grove. But again, they tap for all 3, so that's what you want. I run the original of or I run the Zendikar Manlands. I do not have the blue-green Manland yet, although I might get it, I might not. It comes into play tapped. I'm noticing that certain things, certain times I'm getting more come into play tap lands than not, and I'm trying to do my best to avoid that without getting into alpha and beta lands. Those are just way out of my price range, but instead of getting those duels, I went ahead and got the shock lands that do come into play tapped if you don't want to pay the life. But you know, when you're at 40 life, that extra that extra bit of life that you have means that it's not going to hurt you as much. So we need ways to search those up. I've got, once again, Zendikar fetches. I'm going to go ahead and replace that Arid Mesa soon. I've already got it in plan to get the blue-white and the green-white fetch in there, so I can at least get rid of that one and one other land for it. I've got a couple inferior lands, such as Yavimaya Coast here. It's good for fixing, but I just don't like it. I don't want to keep hitting myself for one every time I want to use one of the colors, so anywho. The other 2 fetches that I have are the come into play tap fetches. Terramorphic Expanse and Bant Panorama. If you've never seen the foil Bant Panorama, it's very pretty. Donato Gincola did a really good job with it. Now, I don't run a land destruction heavy meta or anything like that, so I went ahead and played the bounce lands as well, all three of them, and I tell you, these are great in this deck because this deck runs Wargate. You can Wargate for 3 and get one of these 2-mana lands, bounce one to your hand, and if you haven't played a land that turn, you can play it, and basically you've just ramped yourself 2 mana for 3. They're great little cards. I always enjoy them, and I don't get punished for them, but if you do play against a lot of land destruction, be wary of that. Riftstone Portal is really, really fun in a couple of situations. The best one is if you get it in your hand with a Mox Diamond. You discard this to Mox Diamond, and now your islands tap for all 3 colors, and all of your lands tap for green-white. Other than that, it does tap for colorless if you need it to, but do everything you can to get it into the graveyard. Then we've got the boring blue-white land. Again, a life blue-white land. Like I said, there's a lot of blue and a lot of white in this deck. The rest of the lands are single color or no color. Because I have so much card draw, I felt Reliquary Tower was just absolutely necessary in this deck. You'll see a couple of the cards that just you get so many options in your hand that you tend to overwhelm folks at that point. This is the example of the card that was meant for the Rafik deck. Probably going to replace this with a basic forest or at least a fetch at some point. It's not necessary. I never activate it anymore because it doesn't get the double strike and the exalted trigger very much. Okina, Temple to the Grandfathers. I've never used this land, but it doesn't come into play tapped, and it's still basically a forest, so there's no reason for me not to run it, really. Iganjo Castle, again, I think I used the ability on this one time, but that was back when it was a Rafik deck, so I can't really say much about its efficacy in this one. Manamo is incredible in this deck. You pay 2 mana, essentially, and you untap your general, you untap Roon, you untap any of the other things that you might be using, and you get another activation. This one is one that is not just a land. Oboro is, however. It's just like the other, the green one and the white one. Returning it to my hand, I've only used that one time, and that was when someone was trying to cast an it was Armageddon, trying to destroy all lands, and there's no reason for all that. Come on now. Halimar Depths, kind of like in my big blue deck, there's no reason not to play this. It does come into play tapped, but it lets you know what your next draws are going to be. It lets you filter them out a little bit. And the last of my lands is the one-of artifact land, the Tree of Tales. No reason to have this in here other than I had all 3 in there at one point, and I ended up taking 2 of them out. This, again, is going to become a basic forest, probably. But that's the lands. I have a lot more mana in terms of artifacts, which we will get to now. So I did mention this card earlier, Mox Diamond. It's the most awkwardly worded card, but it's worded that way for a specific reason. Apparently, at some point, there was a way to counter this after you had already discarded your land, and it would put you down 2 cards. So they fixed the wording on it to where it no longer costs you double if someone were to counter this. I've never had it countered, so it's never come into question. Like I said, the main purpose of that is to, well, I mean, the purpose obviously is to ramp early if you can get it, and to fix later if you can't get it early. But to get that Riftstone Portal in the graveyard is its best use. I run the trifecta of signets. All 3 of them are really, they're the bread and butter of getting early ramp in this deck if you're not playing a creature to do so. I love these things. I'm trying to get the Azorius one in foil. The other 2 already are. That one is just extraordinarily high for a foil common, but I mean, sometimes it's the price you gotta pay. The Obelisk of Bant, it's kind of like the Darksteel Ingot, but it's not indestructible. I like it. It's pretty. The art looks good, and that's enough reason for me. And of course, since I'm running colors in this deck, I have to run Gilded Lotus. It's fantastic. Always want to play this card when it's in your hand. You can use this to do anything for the most part in this deck. I can't think of any. No, I don't have anything in this deck that requires colorless mana. That stuff just came out and I haven't added anything. But that's the end of the mana. And we've got 4 other artifacts to go by, or to go with. Lightning Greaves, slap this on Roon, give him haste, and he'll always have haste until they destroy these Greaves. Honestly, there's not a bad creature to put this on. You can put it on your mana creature and then play something else. You know, anything you can give haste is just going to make it that much better. Panharmonicon, fairly new edition. Obviously, there's a date on the bottom there that says 2016. Doubling the triggers is very, very good. This is when any artifact or creature enters the battlefield causing something of yours to trigger. Now, for the life of me, I can't recall if there are any when any creature enters the battlefield triggers in this deck, but it still triggers yours double. Conjurer's Closet, it's a free flicker at the end of turn. Uh, it's perfect in the deck. You can't argue it. I would never take it out. Now, this one I have not been super impressed by. It's really good in terms of board sweepers. It gives your creatures, any number of creatures, and not just yours, persist. It can even hit creatures that are 1/1s or 0/1s. Those creatures still enter the battlefield. So Eternal Witness comes in, and even though it's a 0/0 as a state-based effect, it's put into the graveyard, but it still triggers as it enters the battlefield. So this card has had some good use, but it costs 5. I want to replace it with something a little bit better. I've got enough creatures as is for now, so I think I'm going to probably replace it with some other kind of instant or sorcery, maybe like a Time Warp, so I can go infinite on turns at some point. But for now, it does fit. You can still use it if you like the card, and if you play against a lot of board sweeps, it can still be quite powerful. So there's the artifacts. Now let's get to the Planeswalkers. Kept it kind of simple with the Planeswalkers in this deck. I only run 3. Tamayo, Field Researcher. The +1 ability is it's all about protection, trying to save yourself. There's not a whole lot of ways. Well, I take that back. There are a lot of ways to protect yourself in this deck, but this one is one of my favorite because ramping up a Planeswalker gets the target off of you, and it's something that has to be dealt with because her -7 ability, getting an emblem where you basically have omniscience it's absurd. Never gotten the ultimate of this off and lost the game. Of course, that can be said about a lot of planeswalkers. This one included. Venser the Sojourner. The +2 ability on this one is perfect for the deck. It's a flicker ability. At the same time, the -1 ability is not irrelevant. There's a couple of creatures in here that this works with well. And the -8 ability, if you get this off, it's going to be game over. You get enough cards in this deck that you're going to start casting stuff and just exiling permanents left and right. Always aim for that if you can, especially since this deck wants to flicker things anyway. The final of the Planeswalkers is Big Jace, Jace the Mind Sculptor. Again, he does everything. If you're running blue, you should be running him. He's, a little bit pricey, but at the same time, totally worth it. All the things that you need to do, from sculpting your hand, get it, Mind Sculptor, to protecting yourself, to removing creatures, to sculpting their draws, and then just winning the game outright. He does it all. You have to run him. My sorceries package is actually kind of small. I only run 4 of them, and 3 of them are tutors. The one that is not a tutor, though, is Flicker. You gotta have Flicker. It's the name of the game. It's what you're trying to do with the deck. No reason not to run it. Plus, it's one of the ones that returns it to play immediately, not end of turn. That is just really, really good. If this were instant speed, I can see it being a rare nowadays, but as it is, I think it would probably be better as an uncommon. This was a rare one. I run Supply and Demand. Supply has been used. I used it in the Rafik deck, but I never have used it in the Roon deck. Demand is what you want to use. I'll get that one a little bit closer. Your library. For a multicolored card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. That is, it's got a ton of targets in this deck. All of them are usually either targets to flicker or Venser the Sojourner. One multicolored card that you can get with it that's neither is another tutor target, Wargate. This one has been an MVP. You get something like a mnemonic wall with it and return Wargate to your hand, then you use all of your flicker effects, and you constantly have a Wargate every turn. Another early use for it, as I said when I was going through the lands, getting lands out of your deck and putting them directly into play so you can ramp until, or especially if you're not drawing them when you need to be. This card is super versatile, gives tons of options, and options are always good. Although it has fewer options, Green Sun Zenith does have the added bonus of being shuffled back into your library. It only searches for green creatures, but it's a little bit easier to cast, and there are quite a few decent targets with it. You can play it for one, search up a Birds of Paradise or a Noble Hierarch, play it for two, and get you a Bloom Tender. Or once you get tons of mana out, you can search up one of your big boys and go ahead and start moving toward ending the game. Since, as we said earlier, the name of the game is to flicker things, my enchantment package is going to start with Flicker Form, the enchantment version of Flicker. This one is not an instant return to the battlefield. It does happen at the end of turn, but it has the bonus of being able to do it repeatedly. You just don't want to put anything else on that creature because any other enchants will fall off. Aura Shards fits so perfectly into this deck. It turns all of your creatures into a naturalize that you can use repeatedly. There's tons and tons of artifact and enchantment destruction. This is one of the better ones, considering how many times you're going to have creatures coming into play. Oblivion Ring is the naturalize for any permanent. You gotta love this card. It's super well balanced. I've always enjoyed it, and it's. I don't know. I actually can't recall if there is a way other than with Venser to. I know Venser works. You can flicker the Oblivion Ring and choose a different target if something more terrifying comes in, but that's another option for it. It's also good because this deck runs Sun Titan. We'll get to him. If someone does destroy the O-Ring, you can bring it back. But that's all the enchantments. Let's move on to the instance, and we will start with our other flicker package. Otherworldly Journey has a few uses in this deck. This one, you can actually remove any creature from play until the end of turn, but it does come back into play with a +1/+1 counter on it, which means it's less good against opponents unless there's, for whatever reason, you want to put a 1/1 counter on a creature an opponent controls. Generally, you target your own creatures with this one, the best one in the deck being Prime Speaker Zagana, because the +1/+1 counter means you draw another card. We'll get to her when we hit the creatures, but for now, let's move on. Turn to Mist, another one, remove any target creature from the game and then return it to control or return it to play under its owner's control at the end of turn. A little bit easier to cast with the hybrid blue-white mana cost. A little more to say about this card, not much else that it does. Momentary Blink is only going to target things you control, and this is one of the ones that returns it to play instantly when this resolves. So you don't have to wait until end of turn. This does have uses in this deck that go above and beyond just removing things from play until the end of turn. The flashback cost on it is just 3 in a blue and 1 in a white. It's a great card. It's got good value. Ghostly Flicker is another one just like it, except you do 2 at the same time with this one. Only things that you control, but it can be artifacts, creatures, or lands, and they come back as soon as this resolves, so you don't have to wait until end of turn once again. Now with this one, you do have to wait until end of turn. It does only target it does only target creatures you control, but you can exile any number of them. Now once you're hitting 3 or 4 targets with this, usually you're casting this as a win more card, but sometimes you do have a bunch of targets that aren't actually winning you the game. They're just like drawing you cards and setting up defense. Either way, this card is pretty powerful, although I can only really see it being super powerful in a deck like this one. The other instants that I have in this deck are part of the non-flicker package. We've got, of course, your basic removal package, your Path to Exile, and your Swords to Plowshares. If you're running white, you should probably be running both of these cards. I can't think of many good reasons not to. Congregation at Dawn, great in this deck, especially because all of your creatures come with extra spells attached to them, basically. You're not just searching up any random creatures. You can search up 3 combo pieces if you want to. You can search, and it says up to 3, so you only need to search 1 or 2 if you need it. So, great, and the fact that it's instant speed means you can do it at the end of turn and set up a pretty good set up a draw to where the creature that you hit on top is going to draw you the other two, etc. Bant Charm. If you're playing Bant, you should be playing the charm that goes with it. It can destroy artifacts, it can bury creatures. No longer can it bury generals, so it's just a wee bit weaker than it was at one point. I hated doing that to people because it felt dirty to do that anyway, but they've made it to where you can instead just exile them to the command zone anyway. So that's fine, but it also has a little bit of a counter spell attached to it, which is good because this deck only runs 3 or 4 counters anyway. Frozen Grip is great to stop any mind over matter and Temple Bell shenanigans like the ones I run in my blue deck. It obviously can be used to destroy any artifact or enchantment and not allow anyone to respond to it, so if something's a problem, go ahead and get rid of it. Cryptic Command, another one of the uh, all-around do-it-all spells. In this deck, I tend to counter spells and then return a creature to my hand, although you can do the typical counter a spell and then draw a card with it. Very versatile. It does everything you need. If you need to tap down all the creatures your opponents control, this deck can go aggro if it has to. And then you got Plasm Capture. It's Mana Drain's clunkier younger brother. I won't say older brother because Mana Drain is much older. And honestly, let's not lie to ourselves. It is much better. But it is also much more expensive. So Plasm Capture, when you counter the spell at the beginning of your next pre-combat main phase, you add X mana and any combination of colors to your mana pool where X is that spell's converted mana cost. Great card. I've only cast it a couple of times, but when I did, I ended up playing something absurdly large way earlier than I should. Now we get to the bread and butter of this deck, the creatures. These are the things that make this machine just start cranking out value. We're going to start with some unexciting creatures that should be in all these decks that run triple color. Clear that out for you. First, we got Birds of Paradise. If you're running green, this fixes for everything. Wonderful, wonderful card. Noble Hierarch, a little bit of a more expensive Birds of Paradise in this deck, but it also has the Exalted trigger, which is not completely irrelevant. Like I said, this deck can go aggro if it needs to. Uh, Again, it's way more expensive, not necessary because the Exalted isn't as big a deal when you're not running Rafik, but I still run it for the fixing. Sekira Tri-Builder, same as before. Like I said, I only run 6 basics, and there are a few ways to tutor him up, so he's good to get early on. He's less exciting late game. Generally want to see him in your opening hand if possible, but or obviously you don't really choose that. He's a good target for your tutors early on. Bloom Tender is the best value for a 2 uh, mana dork that you're going to get. The tapping for 3 colors is really good early, mid, and late game. I mean, once you've got a huge clump of mana going, it's not really all that relevant, but still very good. No reason not to run it. Arguably, Coiling Oracle could fit into this because if the top card of your library when he comes into play is a land card, it does ramp you. Other than that, he's ramp or draw. Just a great card, perfect for this deck. Very efficiently costed, does everything you need him to. The Mistmeadow Witch is one that was in Rafik but fits even better in this deck. It's another flicker. It's an end of turn flicker, but it's one that you can use multiple times, and there are ways to get infinite mana and just go nuts and remove everything from the game that you don't want in play until the end of turn, or just constantly flicker your own things and get tons of value out of it. Great card, perfect in this deck, can't cut it. I run the 2 walls, the original Wall of Blossoms and its predecessor, the Wall of Omens. There's no reason not to. They protect you. They're good early game. You can probably get away with just running one of them, or if you want to replace them both with Elvis Visionary, that's a 1/1 that does the same thing. I like the 0/4 because you generally aren't going aggro with a 1/1 anyway. Harmonic Sliver, this is an aura shards on a stick. You can use this one and flicker it every time you want to get an aura shards effect without having that enchantment itself in play. So not a bad one to have. And if by any strange coincidence you're playing against a Sliver Overlord deck who happens to be running their own, you can then allow yourself to gain the abilities of those creatures, but then you give them that ability too. So Eternal Witness is a godsend in this deck. It gets anything back from your graveyard, sets up some really, really good combinations. It's just great value, no reason not to run it. Venser, Shaper Savant. Again, this is one of the ones where the returning to the battlefield as the flicker ability resolves is important. You can permanently bounce spells back to their opponent, their owner's hands if you could just do that over and over. In other ways to use it, once you get infinite flickers going, you can start bouncing all of their lands back to their hands, just setting everyone back to 0 except yourself. He's really, really powerful in this. Other than that, he's a 2/2 with flash that can be sort of a remand, if you will. Brago, King Eternal, fairly recent addition, obviously. Whenever he deals combat damage to a player, exile any number of target non-land permanents that you control, and then return them to the battlefield immediately. Because this can only be done in your combat step, you can't do a lot of tricks with it, but things coming into play still on your turn gives you more options. So you don't have to wait until end of turn and then draw cards, etc., and then play things. Phyrexian Metamorph, great in this deck because it can not only ramp you a little by hitting a ramp artifact, but it's also one that can hit a creature and then be reset later on. I've got a couple of clones in here. They've all been powerhouses. They've all been wonderful. This one just happens to have a couple of extra uses. Mystic Snake is I think it's the only other counterspell that I have in the deck. This is another reason that you'll want the flicker ability to bring it back into play immediately, because it turns Mystic Snake into a reusable counterspell and even cheaper. Solemn Simulacrum. This is the main reason that running 6 basic lands is not enough, because you're just going to be hitting this guy over and over again. And when eventually he'll run out of targets, and then all he's going to be able to do at that point is shuffle your library for you. All right, I had to clear out my workspace. Things were getting cluttered. Let's move on here. We've got the Cloud Blazer. This essentially is a more expensive all the time, but has a little bit of a better effect version of Muldrifter. I happen to run both because, as I said in the video for the Big Blue Magic or the Big Blue Commander deck, the Evoke can still be a divination if necessary. But they're both 2/2 flyers that can block when they need to. They can block and then be flickered after they've done their blocking, and still get you tons of value. Drawing 2 cards extra every turn, always great. I'm going to present the 3 of these out of order because it goes, I go by mana cost, but with these, they go together. Karmic Guide, Revelark, Mirror Entity. If you've never seen the infinite combo with these, I suggest you look it up. With Venser, you can return all permanents to their owner's hands. With Acidic Slime, you can just destroy all artifacts, enchantments, and lands. That's just great little combo that you can do. All of your other creatures are going to die for the most part, but look up the combo, have someone online explain it better than I can, because it would take me forever and I would stumble on my words. Perhaps the silliest card in the deck, Perplexing Chimera. It can also be the most broken. Whenever an opponent casts any spell, you can exchange control of this card and that spell. So if they cast, say, Chandra, just for example, they cast a Planeswalker. You gain control of the Planeswalker, and they get the 3/3. You then use Roon's ability to exile that creature from the battlefield, so the 3/3 is now removed from the play. At the end of turn, it comes back into play under its owner's control. You're the owner, which means the next time someone casts a spell, you can then give them the Perplexing Chimera again. With all the different ways to flicker things, you can almost prevent anybody from casting a spell ever without taking control of it. This card is silly, it is absurd, and it has to be dealt with. Mnemonic Wall, like I said earlier with the Wargate shenanigans, I can generally just start putting infinite things on the battlefield of my choice from my library instead of my hand. I'm going to put a Time Warp in this deck somewhere. I got to figure out what I want to cut, although I might have already made the decision. Fun little card, works on, it doesn't have to just be Wargate that it works with, but that's the main purpose for it. Thragtusk is a 5-mana game ender. If you need to gain life, he's the best way to do it in here. I don't believe I have anything that gains more than that. And that second ability says when he leaves the battlefield, put a 3/3 creature in play. So he doesn't have to die. He just has to leave the battlefield. And when he's flickered, that's exactly what he does. So every turn, you're gaining 5 life and putting a 3/3 in play. It gets really, really out of hand, especially if you do it multiple times per turn. As I told you earlier, I do run Acidic Slime. It's got plenty of options as a removal. It has Death Touch, so it's also creature removal if it needs to be. Great flicker target. Really can put you ahead if you're trying to secure an early lead, because you can ramp to 5 mana in no time. Lavinia of the 10th is just mean. You detain non-land permanents your opponents control with converted mana cost 4 or less. That means until your next turn, those permanents can't attack or block, and the activated abilities can't be activated. Cruel, cruel card to flicker all the time. The protection from red is also very, very relevant. Again, since this is a combo, I'm going to present the cards together instead of separately. Deadeye Navigator and Peregrine Drake. They are both just fine on their own, but if you get them together, that is instant speed, infinite mana. The Deadeye Navigator's Flicker ability returns it to the battlefield under your control as soon as the ability resolves. The Peregrine Drake untaps 5 lands. It only costs 2 to activate, and that just means that you're going to be untapping 5 lands for 2 mana. That is instant, infinite mana. I said I run Prime Speaker Zagana earlier. There she is. When she comes into play, she gets X/1/1 counters, where X is the greatest power among other creatures you control. Generally, you're going to at least have Roon in play by the time you get her out there, which means she's going to draw you 5. If you hit her with the Otherworldly Journey, she's going to get an additional +1/+1 counter when she comes back into play, which means she's going to draw you an additional card. Sun Titan, you know the card. If you don't know the card, it's great. All of your little mana dorks that die, you can bring them back. You can bring back fetch lands and then constantly be shuffling your library and pulling extra lands out of it so you're not drawing them. Good card, good value, has vigilance as well, so there's no reason not to attack with them every turn. Progenitor Mimic is my favorite card in this deck. You can have him into the battlefield as a copy of any creature on the battlefield, except he gains at the beginning of your upkeep. If this creature isn't a token, put a copy of it onto the battlefield. What that says is you put him into play as a clone, and then you put another one into play every turn. Since all of your creatures have enter the battlefield abilities, you're just going to be triggering them for free every turn. If you put another creature in that you like better, flicker this guy and have him copy that creature. If someone else plays a creature, flicker him and put him a copy of that creature. Fantastic, super value, and just one of those ones that, again, can help you just swarm out of control. Speaking of swarm, Avenger of Zendikar is probably the Swarm Lord, putting 0/1 green plant tokens on the battlefield for each land you control, and then +1/+1 counters on them every time a land comes into play. Really, really powerful. This is one of the biggest game enders in the deck. Quicksilver Gargantuan, the last of our clone package. This one is really, really funny to put on a Birds of Paradise, because then you've got a 7/7 bird that taps for 1 mana, but then later on can, of course, be changed into whatever you want to, just as any other clone did. And the final creature in the deck is Trotsani's Summoner. I don't summon quite as many creatures, Swarm Lord, but the creatures that she does bring in are just insanely powerful. She's a 1/1. She brings in a 2/2, a 3/3, and a 4/4. That's 10 power for 7 mana. And then you can pay 2 mana and flicker her and bring in an additional 9 power every turn. You just overrun people without the actual card itself. Love her. Beautiful art. Got the tokens, of course, because you can't play the card without the tokens. So there you have it. That's my take on the Roon of the Hidden Realm Commander deck. There are just an infinite number of possibilities of ways you can go with this deck. Every set that comes out has probably 10 or 15 creatures that have enter the battlefield abilities. Some obviously are better than others. There are some that you can run that would just be terrible, but it's totally your prerogative if you want to. One that I have included in the deck that I recently took out, but will probably end up putting back in, is Terastodon. I've not seen many rune lists that don't run him, and for good reason. If nothing else, you can start destroying your own permanents just so you get more 3/3 tokens out of it. But again, do with it as you please. One extra point of note is I need to send a thank you out to my good friend Alan, who was nice enough to give me this card. I would like to apologize, Alan, for taking so long to actually create a deck around the card that you so kindly donated to me because you knew my love for Bant and you knew my love for the rocks. I hope that this will somehow make it up to you. Y'all take care.